Hello, dear learners. In this video, let us look at the performance management process and the step-by-step process by which organizations or supervisors, through their supervisors, supervise the subordinates and make performance appraisal a very constructive and a process that enables every individual to be giving their best performance in the organization. So let me take you through this particular process. What you see on the screen is the model of the step-by-step process that we undertake in the performance management process. Right. The first step begins with reviewing or developing the position description. Now, this could be based on the goals that we have set for each of the jobs in the department or for each of the individual jobs in the organization. So the supervisor gives a good briefing to the subordinate on what is required by the employee to be doing in his or her job, a brief explanation and clarification on the various tasks, duties, roles, responsibilities. Secondly, the supervisor is going to explain or clarify to the subordinate the expected standard of performance. Third is going to be giving all the necessary resources, the tools or the training or any sort of necessary help and assistance that is required by the subordinate to be able to independently perform or do the job. And then there is ongoing feedback and communication that happens. Now, once the goals are set, the targets are explained, the employee goes about doing his or her job. And while the employee is going about undertaking his or her job, the supervisor can give a lot of concurrent feedback. Feedback as and when the employee is doing the job in terms of helping or guiding or clarifying and making the employee to understand the priorities and what are the kind of focus areas or the focus points that the subordinate has to keep. And if at all there are any difficulties or issues that comes up during the performance process during the time when the individual is performing, then that can be addressed or clarified. Necessary decisions can be taken or made accordingly. Any required adjustments or any sort of reshuffle or any sort of changes or modifications that can be brought in the job or in the process or in the way the employee is being assigned those tasks and responsibilities can be undertaken. So all this can happen. And then finally, the employee is going to be doing the job. And at one point of time, whenever the organization decides to have the formal performance evaluation of the formal performance appraisal, that dates are going to be clearly given or told, and it shouldn't be a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise for the subordinate. The subordinate knows that this is when the performance appraisal is going to take place, and this is the method that the organization follows, and these are all the various metrics on which performance evaluation is going to take place. And once the performance appraisal is done, based on the data that we receive of the performance of the candidate, the supervisor can have a professional, can develop or formulate a professional development plan on in order to help the individual to share the feedback, and help the individual to focus on priority areas or to help the individual giving him or her the necessary feedback about their performance, areas that they are doing well, areas that they need to improve, and what the subordinate is supposed to be doing in order to match the required expected job standards. Or in case the employee's performance is not up to the mark, then the employee can be sent for retraining or any sort of necessary mentoring or assistance or skill development or skill training can often be referred. And once that is done, then uh, the employees who have performed well, those who match the standards and those who exceeded standards, those whose performances have been outstanding, they will have to be recognized, rewarded, and then they have to be given the necessary benefits or incentives that they are eligible for, which has been or which usually organizations announce or inform at the beginning of the performance appraisal process. Now, this is precisely the cycle that every organization undertakes, right from the goal setting process, which begins with step one, till the time we go back and reset or revise the goals after that entire cycle of performance is undertaken or is over. Now, why performance planning becomes very important? The first two or three stages in the appraisal process are very important because this is where we set goals. Once the goals are set or the objectives or the key result areas are identified, it's important for the subordinate who's performing the job to know what these KRAs are, to know what the priorities of the job are, what are the set of tasks, duties, roles, and responsibilities that he or she is supposed to do. And any sort of clarifications that the subordinate requires or needs can often be sought by the superior. The superior is supposed to be helping the subordinate to understand. So what happens during the performance planning process is it provides a link between the job, the work that needs to be done by every staff member, and how each and every individual performances are going to overall contribute to the goals of the department, and how collectively as a department or as a division we are able to achieve our goals and objectives. Secondly, it helps staff members to understand their job roles and responsibilities. So there's no vagueness or abstractness in the way the individual employees understand their jobs. They know what their jobs are, they know what their responsibilities are, and any sort of necessary help or clarification can always be sought from the superiors. It recognizes and rewards the staff members' contribution and fosters them for a higher level of development and growth. Right? For those employees who are performing really well, their goals can be further set higher, or standards can be set higher, or they could be given bigger responsibilities for them to be undertaking as such. And performance planning definitely helps in increasing the productivity and helps correct any sort of problems or difficulties or gaps that could be seen in the performance. And then any sort of required determination in terms of merit, in terms of rewards and recognitions and other benefits that has to be given or given to the employee commensurate to their performances, in order to motivate them, in order to encourage them, in order to help them to sustain that level of good performance, should also be done or given. And all this should be done during the goal setting or the performance planning process. Right. Now let's look at the different goals or objectives that organizations are going to be setting on every job. So when we decide the job standards, or we're explaining the job expectations or the standard of performance that we're expecting from every employee who's going to be doing the job, we need to make sure that these following aspects are part of the explanation or the orientation process. So it should be, the performance expectations should be clear, it should be brief, and it should be attainable, and it should be measurable. Very often, we often say it has to be based on the SMART formula. When we set goals and objectives, we've got to make sure that the goals are specific, they have to be measurable, they have to be attainable, they have to be time bound, and they have to be relatable to whatever the employee is going to be doing. So the various metrics that we look for is the quality, quantity of the job, timeliness of the job, the effective use of resources, what is the manner in which the performance has to be undertaken or done, and then finally what is the method of performing, what's the right way of doing the job should also be explained, oriented, and clarified to the subordinate. Right. Next of all, when we look at setting goals, so when we go about setting performance goals and objectives, or we're orienting and clarifying, these following aspects should be kept in mind while we're doing it, to make sure that there are no unrealistic goals, or goals that are highly difficult for anybody to attain should not be given as such. So we're going to use specific examples of behavior of the desired results. So not just giving in those metrics, or just letting know of the quality or the quantity of the job that is desirable from the workers. We need to be giving an explanation. Supervisors must explain or clarify what is the standard of performance that they're expecting in terms of, so using appropriate examples of what's the right kind of behavior, or demonstrating and showing what is the apt behavior or the standard of behavior that is expected would be a good way to make subordinates understand about their job roles and responsibilities. Secondly, avoiding any sort of evaluative terms to say, good work or bad attitude should not be described as such. So, giving an extreme view of what it is. right? So we should be able to avoid that and make sure that whatever explanation is given in a very rational and in a very objective manner. Third of all, we need to be wary of using terms that always or never. So whenever we like explaining, we should not go back on the past performance or the past behavior of the subordinate and then say you are somebody who's always doing this, or you are somebody who never does these things on time. So rather than using those kind of specific examples or using specific negative terms that really don't encourage or motivate an employee, so we must be able to ignore what has been done in the past, but we should be able to remember that, but be able to put that in a manner that is going to be encouraging the workers to be doing their job. So rather than using it as a negative example and highlight or typecast a particular employee of being of that particular attitude or that sort of behavior, it's always better that we are able to look forward to what we're expecting. Look at a very positive side of things. Look at a feedback that is very much feed forward, something that positively reinforces or motivates an employee. Avoid using numbers in goals unless and you actually intend to do that in terms of numbers or targets. When we specify, that can sometimes be very scary, or sometimes it may not be possible for anybody to attain it. So rather than give numbers, we can really talk about the job, because doing the job or getting those results largely depends on many other factors that are dependent on one doing the job. And then fifth of all, consider the cost benefit of gathering data performance, which is very much a part of the performance appraisal process or the method. So what are the methods of verifying performance? There are different ways by which we can gather data for performance evaluation. One is we can do that through supervisors, can do that through direct observation. They can observe how the employee is going about doing his or her job. One is through direct observation, and direct observation should never be something where the subordinate is very conscious. We should be able to observe, but be able to also not make the subordinate conscious, and allow that sort of necessary freedom and independence and autonomy for the subordinate to be able to do the job. Secondly, depend on the reports of others' observations, especially for with immediate supervisors or managers who can give feedback on how this particular employee is performing or doing. So receiving feedback from those who are directly in contact or those who are able to observe employees working or subordinates working would be a good set of information, that data that we can rely upon for doing the performance appraisal. And thirdly, written records such as attendance, financial assignments, logs, or status reports can also be relied upon. And results should often be in the form of tangible products. At the end of the day, we should be able to look at results that are concrete rather than anything else that will not be adding any value to the organization, right? Next, we should be able to record performance. So when we're recording performances, or we're going to be capturing the actual data of how the employee is doing the job, the first aspect is we must be able to record only job related performance, and we should be avoiding making any sort of statements about any sort of an individual. So nothing should be very personal, it should be job related performance. Secondly, we should try not to record every event. We should be able to select a representative sample of the performance, not just look at micromanaging or micro observing, but be able to look at a sample of the job and then be able to generalize that. Thirdly, be able to look at information or data that can help us to cross validate, use multiple data points, and through those data points be able to gather the performance of the individual. And fourth of all, record both positive and negative. So very often what supervisors tend to do is they record only negative data, what that the job that was not done or KRAs that were not achieved, right? So rather than look at only work that was not done or expectations or standards that were not met, it's very important that subordinates be evaluated on both the positive aspects of the job, positive outcomes of the job, positive results of the job, as well as the negative aspects of the job. Right. Most importantly, now what do we do with the performance appraisal data? Once we do the performance appraisal, we have the performance appraisal data. Now, with the performance appraisal data, we should be able to managing performances. So, um, the data is presented now. The supervisor and the subordinate should be able to meet and then have a discussion over the performance uh, data that they have gathered. So share knowledge and experience. Supervisors should be able to do that. Secondly, share feedback and observations. Right, as we said, talk about the positive things. What were the encouraging things, or the motivating things, or aspects of the job performance that we were able to see of the employee, right? And it should be able to stimulate thinking. It should make the individual or the subordinate feel good about their performances, be able to make them think about what's the next nice thing that they can do, or what's the right way in which they can take the job forward. Fourth of all, we should be able to facilitate listening. We should be able to listen both ways. In fact, the subordinate has to be able to listen to the feedback that the supervisor is giving. And then if the subordinate has an explanation or has a certain information to share, then the superior should also be willing to look at the point of view of the subordinate and explore options and other consequences together. As superiors and subordinates, it's the responsibility of both of them to be able to ensure that the job is well done. It's not just the responsibility of the subordinate to be able to do the job, because the supervisor also has an equal hand in helping, guiding, motivating, and ensuring that the subordinate is doing it. So all this has to be properly done through the delegation of authority, responsibility, and the accountability process, and allow the employee to find their own conclusions. You can present the data, you can show the set of performance observations or standards, and then allow the subordinate to analyze their own performances, understand their own performances, and then be able to plan or reset as to how they would want to perform or do this job as such. So that's where the performance management process becomes very important. And all of this performance management or the performance appraisal part will come when we are doing the actual performance appraisal. The step where we are recording or gathering the performance appraisal. So a formal performance review must be conducted. Maybe it can be conducted half yearly, or it can be done once a year, wherein through the data we're able to gather the performance of the candidate. And using those performances, the supervisor and the subordinate must be able to have a very healthy discussion to see how performances can be improved, performances can become positive, performances that can help in helping the individual to do his or her job, and also the organization should be able to achieve its objectives. So discussions, performance oriented discussions, the performance managed data or feed forward discussions should often more frequently, because this very often will help us to clarify these objectives. Then and there itself, be able to guide, help, motivate the subordinate to be able to do well. And all this should be done in a very structured manner, healthy manner, positive manner, in a manner which is not very critical, but in a manner that rather encourages, motivates, or reinforces the subordinates to achieve higher levels of performance. So, what is some guidelines that we can follow where we do the performance appraisal process? The first guideline is to make sure that frequent communication throughout the year, not just at the time when we do performance appraisal, and this communication or explanations and discussion or counseling should not happen once a year. It should happen as frequently as possible. You can do that as and when you meet, or as and when periodically you can fix up, and then you can assess the performance, then figure out what needs to be, what's the good thing that's going on, what's going right, what's not going right, and then be able to feed forward using that particular feedback. You should allow this opportunity. We should be Organizations should be able to allow individuals to assess and judge their own performance. So that's the best way to make individuals to set their goals, to analyze, and then be able to objectively come up with their own goals and responsibilities. Third, we should be able to give them a warm up period. So rather than to straight away push them into the performance appraisal or the performance process, we should be able to allow them to give them a warm up period. So maybe give them a certain feeling of how this whole aspect is done. Or maybe we can do that in the first month, right? And then we can say this is how the entire process is going to be for the next of the months. And we can always do a quarterly appraisal, and then have a performance counseling, and then go about constructively building on each other's strengths. So we should be able to do that, build on each other's strengths, and then be able to be a positive listener, and then very importantly, judge performances and not the person. We must not become very critical on evaluating or judging or stereotyping or typecasting an individual, but rather we should be able to judge performance. So we should only be able to look at job related factors and keep ourselves away from evaluating the person, right? So when we do performance appraisals, when we rate the performances of individuals, basically four parameters that we possibly would want to achieve. One is we will check whether the employee's performance is meeting the job expectations, because precisely that is what we want. And the second result could be employees' performances are exceeding job expectations. So that's where we say an employee has done a very outstanding job or an outstanding performance. Thirdly, it could be they are partially meeting. They're almost there, but not meeting the standards. They must be around 65 to 80% there, but not yet 100%. And then fourth could be employee who fails in achieving those job standards or job targets. So once we are able to precisely place candidate performances on these four categories, we should also have an action plan on what are we planning to do with those who are meeting job expectations. So what way are we going to recognize them? In what way are we going to acknowledge their performances? In what way are we going to be rewarding or ensuring that they are eligible for incentives? So how are we going to treat? How are we going to differentiate the performances of those who are meeting the job expectation? How are we going to differentiate and ensure that those who are exceeding job expectations, how are they going to be treated and taken care of? And what are we going to do with those who are partially meeting? And what we are going to do with those employees whose performances is not up to the expectation, not up to the mark? Because unless and until we are able to act on the performances and differentiate individuals on the basis of performances and have an action plan or an orientation on what to do with that, we will never be able to go ahead. Or performance appraisal sometimes can lose its meaning, or it can fail, and it can demotivate an employee who's doing well. If everybody is put onto the same bracket and everybody becomes eligible for the same set of rewards or benefits or compensation as such. So it's very important, as we said in the performance appraisal, to have an appraisal discussion. The appraisal discussion should concentrate on clearly stating the purpose of the meeting, what are we here for, and explain the process of what we are going to be doing, the agenda of how we are going to go about doing the performance discussion. Second is tell every employee what is going to be the outcome of the meeting and how from the meeting we're going to be deciding on our future assignments or ensuring that the discussion room is open for both way communication, not just the supervisors communicating or telling the workers, but also allowing the workers to be able to air their views or grievances or difficulties or any other concerns that they may have, helping the staff member to feel very easy and comfortable, and then be able to feel at home and be able to share their views. Fourth is to avoid criticism on any personality, personal, or use any personal references or use personal examples. And we should be able to listen to everyone and be able to gather whole points collectively and holistically. And then finally, we should be able to conclude a summary of the main points. So what have we learned out of this discussion? So how are we going to use these discussions of the information that's come from both ends, the supervisor side, of the management side, and from the worker side, and have every employee to look at it very positively, and then be able to see how they can take this forward, take this further, how they're going to be making some improvements or changes, or how they're going to be using this to help and reset their goals. The appraisal discussions finally should also self-evaluate the supervisor. Supervisors must be able to learn from this exercise. They must also be able to evaluate whether this performance appraisal process really went according to how we wanted it to happen. So we're going to be asking these following questions. Did everything go on well as the way we had planned? And what were the topics that we discussed, and what are the topics that successfully were dealt with, and what are the topics that we could not address well? Thirdly, what subjects were of interest to the staff members? What were their areas of concern? What were their interests? And how much were they involved in all of this? Fourthly, is for all the important points discussed, as we wanted to discuss all of that in the beginning of the meeting, and what are the kind of business or points that we were not able to touch upon, and what are the kind of areas or points that we decided that we want to work on, and then further, what are the points that we would want to take that for the future meeting, what kind of KRAs were set, what objectives were set, and then finally ensuring what are we going to do with the performances of those individuals according to the criteria that we have been able to see as such. Well, those are some of the areas that we will be focusing on, and ensuring that the performance appraisal exercise must be a very meaningful exercise. Right? A meaningful exercise, an exercise that is done with a lot of planning, that is done with a lot of thought, that is done with a very positive attitude and a positive mindset of ensuring that we collectively work for the organization. It shouldn't be an exercise we are taking pot shots at individuals. It should be an exercise where we're looking at the collective objective of the organization, the department, the division, and helping every individual to be able to feel happy about their job, to know every aspect of their job well, and then be able to do their jobs well as such. So this is where performance appraisal this is how the performance appraisal process and the whole exercise should be looked at, rather than an exercise that is feared upon, or an exercise where employees feel that they're going to be taken for task, or the employees feel that they're going to be reprimanded, or anything of that sort. It should always be a very constructive, positive, happy, and nice process that helps create a win-win kind of a situation where the organization achieves the objectives that they have set through the individuals, and the individuals should also be able to be very good job performers at the end of the appraisal process as such. So that's the conclusion that we are bringing to this particular part of the video. That's a very important exercise, very thoughtful, meaningful, and an exercise that should help both parties within the organization, the management and the workers, work together as a well-oiled team with a single point agenda and purpose. Thank you.